Good morning on this Sunday, May 7th, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. Terror and tragedy after a gunman opens fire in a Midtown medical facility. A date for Georgia's presidential primary is now set, and some lawmakers are calling for the U.S. Justice Department to investigate the shooting death of a protester at the site of the Atlanta police training facility. Melita, Phil, Theron, and Janelle are all here. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Democrats are once again calling for tighter gun restrictions after yet another mass shooting, this one unfolding right here in Atlanta. It was an all too familiar scene that we've seen across the country unfolded this week in Atlanta. In the end, one woman was shot and killed, 4 others injured at a medical facility in Midtown. An hours-long manhunt ended in Cobb County when police zeroed in on suspect Dion Patterson. His attorney, Sean Hoover, says Patterson is a veteran and suffers from apparent mental health issues. My team is investigating the details and circumstances of the charges to provide him with zealous, effective, and timely representation. Detectives are still looking for a possible motive. Atlanta's police chief says he's proud of his officers' response and the cooperation from all agencies involved.
3 things were happening, Deidre, at the exact same time. We had an armed gunman loose in a building. And so we had teams in that building looking for him to stop the attack, to take him into custody. We also had officers taking paramedics and firefighters to the 11th story to remove critically injured citizens while we still had an armed gunman on the loose. And we had citizens that had barricaded themselves in rooms throughout that building for their own safety that we had to locate, let them know that we were the police, and get them safely out of that building.
After this latest mass shooting, Democrats call for safer gun laws yet again.
And if we refuse to act while our children are dying, and in a moment when no one is safe, then shame on us. Shame on us if we allow this to happen and we do absolutely nothing.
Theron, you've often said right here on this show that it's just a matter of time until it happens here.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate. And first, I want to offer my condolences to the victim, her family, and other people who were injured. Wish them a speedy recovery. And also, Lori, as I shared with you, I'm a patient at Laureate Medical Group. I went there last week. I think I shared with many of you all. I was going to the doctor, and so to have that happen in Midtown at a place where I visited, that staff there also wished them a recovery, because that was pretty tragic. So let's get to what we're here to talk about, and that is this issue that we have, which is a 3-dimensional issue. It's dealing with mental illness, it's dealing with gun violence, and I think the 3rd dimension, Lori, is really how do we solve the root issue here? Sort of like, how do we get to the cause of people who are mentally ill, who are having and getting access to guns, and this man was basically, when we read, wanting medicine, didn't get it, and decided to use that gun to kill innocent people who were there in the room. And so I agree with Senator Warnock wholeheartedly that only in this country, at a time when we sit here, we're at over 190 mass shootings in the U.S. I will repeat that. As we sit here, we've had 190 mass shootings in the United States of America. And so I agree with my fellow Democrats that we've got to have more gun control, we've got to have more responsible gun ownership, but we got to deal with this issue around mental illness. And, you know, it's just a revolving cycle. You know, we have the condolences and prayers, all the social media posts, and then we pray for the families and the victims, and then we go back to normal. And I just think that this massacre, this mass shooting that happened in Atlanta is going to change the way we think about guns, mental illness, and getting to the root issue of crime, and getting to the root issue of people who are mentally ill getting access to guns. And I hope that my colleagues will join me in saying that people who have been diagnosed with mental illness should not have access to guns, because we see what happened when they have those guns.
So let's go beyond all the talking points, because I really want to dig down into this issue. Phil, where can Republicans come to the table? Because both sides are kind of here. But where is there room for compromise? Is it on the mental health issue? You all agree, right, that something has to be done in terms of you shouldn't have access to guns if you have mental illness.
Well, yes.
But there's HIPAA laws, so it's complicated.
I think this is where we could come together. I've heard all of the panelists here in the gang over the last year or two talk about mental health. The Republicans doesn't get much publicity in the mainstream media, but the Republicans have done a lot. Just in Georgia, we've had some mental health legislation done just the last 2 sessions. There's got to be more. I think that let's talk about the Georgia Department of Behavioral Health. They need to step it up. They've been criticized, and rightly so, for not getting more facilities out there. We need to fund that more. In fact, the commissioner was even reprimanded for not doing as much. It doesn't get much headlines. It should. And so we need more psychiatric hospitals in the state of Georgia. You've got inmates in there that are waiting to go to the psychiatric hospitals, but they're staying in jail, which doesn't do them much good for 8-9 months, according to the last study I saw. And again, let's stop with the gun control. That's not going to work. Even to his credit, Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens said, we can't violate the Second Amendment. I was glad he said that. So let's focus on mental health. And yes, I do join with all of us in condolences. It's something that shouldn't have happened. I think the only silver lining was the great police and law enforcement coordination, multi-jurisdictional.
We're going to talk about that. I want to push back a little bit on what you said, Phil, about DBHDD and Commissioner Kevin Tanner, because he's only been on the job for 5 months. And the legislature finally made it a decade of mental health and finally put money behind DBHDD.
Well, he inherited a lot of this.
He did, but I will tell you that there is a lot of work happening in that space because I work with DBHDD. There's a lot on the horizon and a lot of good work going on.
But the delays are a real problem.
Melita.
But the Republicans allowed the second half of that comprehensive mental health law that was passed in 2022 to be, they just didn't finish the job. They allowed the lieutenant governor to make the rest of the mental health reform from 2022, the second part of that law for 2023. It became a political football, and they took no action. So that shows that Republicans were not committed to mental health and that they were willing to make that entire issue and a comprehensive reform bill a political football.
Janelle, Atlanta Mayor Andre Dickens penned a letter and pointed out other countries have mental illness, but they don't have the gun violence like we do. And he says, the issues are guns.
So before I get to that, I want to say this. I share the condolences with those who are affected by this. I feel like in the political space, we've lost all humanity. The moment this happens, it hasn't even been 24 hours, and we're already talking about the political side of it. We already have legislators and elected officials using this as a political pawn to kind of go back and forth. And I just think we've lost humanity. People have lost their lives. There are people whose lives are in shambles as a result of this. And the fact that we're continuing to bring this back to the weapon shows a neglect from the person. At the end of the day, I know we're all talking about mental health, and I think we all agree. I stand with Phil on this one. We need facilities for sure. We need the people to have a location that they can go to. When it comes to focusing in on the weapon, it comes off as if we didn't have mass killings prior to guns being invented. I mean, there were tons of mass killings over centuries and centuries of times, whether it was by sword or bow and arrow or clubs. I mean, the weapon was never the focus. We have to narrow in on what's causing human beings to be put in these positions where they feel like they have no other option but to harm people or themselves. And at the end of the day, when we continue to focus in on the weapon of itself, I feel, again, that this is a humanity issue because we are completely neglecting people. We're living in a country where I feel like we're a godless country. We're losing all morals. There's no moral compass. Faith is thrown out of the water. I mean, it's just, at the end of the day, as human beings, we're not looking at how this is affecting people. We're not talking about people. So absolutely, I feel like something has to be done. I think it's connected to the mental health space because, and I must note this too, the mass shooting definition has changed a lot as well. I mean, it used to be, 200,000 or more. Now we're down to 4 or more. And that obviously is going to show an increase when we're talking about 4 or more versus 200,000 or more. So there's a lot of conversation, but the mental health is the discussion.
I agree with you on the mental health issue, but look, there is an ease of access to guns. Yes. In the olden days, you couldn't just go to a store, pick out a gun, and shoot somebody right away.
But you could have a sword.
Different.
In the olden days, you had swords.
I'm not going to have this argument with you, Theron. Theron.
Well, that's right.
Theron.
Do you want to say something later? I'm sorry.
What I wanted to say is that swords or bows and arrows could never kill as many people as an AR-15 in so short a period of time. And that is what makes modern history and the need to control who can get what kind of weapon, how they store it, and how they buy the ammo for it.
Well, Lori, you and I were downtown when this happened, and let's bring it home. And I agree with some of the things that Janelle said, and I disagree. Let me start with putting the situation that Lori out in. We're sitting there working, and we start hearing sirens. And so I agree with you, Phil. Shout out to the multi-jurisdictional folks. There's too many agencies to name. I don't want to get a name, but all of them who helped, even Grady Hospital, who are treating these injured victims. What I disagree a little bit on is that, look, one death is too many. Whether it's 4 mass, the definition, or if it's 200, it's too many. But I agree with you on the people. So let's get down to where we are as a country. And you said something. We got to really understand that even before the pandemic, but ever since this deadly pandemic, people are mentally and emotionally and physically stressed.
Yes.
I feel it. I know y'all feel it. We have family members that do it. And so I would call on all the Republicans and Democrats to come together. And yeah, you're going to have this robust debate about guns, because I do believe that it's the access to guns. No one is trying to take away people's guns. Phil, I know you're not accusing me of saying that. I do support the Second Amendment, but I think that this gentleman was mentally ill. He was asking for help. He did have a prior record. It was, he had been locked up. He was on a discharge from the military, and he was walking into a facility, what I read, with his mother. And whatever happened, whatever transpired up until that point, that's where we got to go. And that was Janelle's point. And so at a time where I think that Republicans and Democrats come together about mental illness, but we got to deal with the issue of poverty. We got to deal with the issue of the way that the people are being raised. And more importantly, if they need a medicine, let's make sure they're properly diagnosed and they can get that medicine. But I just think that the people aspect of this is true, but I agree with Lori. We are in a guns anytime, anywhere state, y'all.
Yes, we are.
And right now, we could be on this set, and who knows? Y'all don't know if I have a gun or not. We don't know.
I'll protect you.
But my point I was making, if someone in this studio had a bad day or going through something mentally tough, they start to shoot. Yeah, we want to protect ourselves, but we're all law-abiding citizens. And now the law basically says anyone can get a gun, and so that's the fundamental issue. Is the access.
Phil.
Well, I agree with some of your points. I do think, though, and here's something for the Democrats. Already it's a felony when you're killing people or using a firearm in general to try to injure someone. How about let's have the legislature, like what they did in Florida, let's expand the category for the death penalty. Let's have more of a deterrent. I think that sadly, over the last few years, we're not getting the prosecutions that we need for firearm-related crimes. I think that's an avenue that we need to be looking at. And so I call on Democrats, let's expand the categories for the death penalty, and let's use it so there's a deterrent.
I don't think that expanding the death penalty as a deterrent will really register with someone who's mentally ill, Phil.
Well, that's a separate part. You've got to, as I just pointed out earlier in the program, you've got to have help for these people. You've got to have more facilities for these people.
And I think that's something that we all agree on, the mental health
issue.
And
we've loosened the restrictions for classifying the mentally ill, too.
I gotta leave it there, guys. Up next, the date has been set for Georgia's presidential primary. We'll discuss after the break.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
March 12th, 2024. That's the date Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger has set for Georgia's presidential primary, dashing the hopes for Democrats who wanted the Democratic primary moved up before Super Tuesday. Melita.
Well, we'll still have an early primary, and it's going to be very interesting to see how all of this talk of Brad Brian Kemp being drafted to run for president will play into this date for Georgia.
Phil, would have an even earlier presidential primary, would that have helped Georgia? And I mean, we are definitely a battleground state. We are in the spotlight, but the Democrats were saying that this could, increase all of the money coming into Georgia, create more jobs.
Well, I think it would have helped on the Democrat side Joe Biden if it was earlier. The problem, and that Raffensperger pointed this out, is that it would be violating party rules. And he certainly, and I agree with this, he certainly didn't want to have two primaries and more expense. So I think it helps the Republicans a little bit more, and it puts the Republicans in a better position.
All right, I want to move on. Governor Brian Kemp this week reportedly making the move to sign the bill into law that allows a state commission to investigate and even remove district attorneys. Now, critics, including many Democrats, Theron, say that this is a power move.
Well, I've said on this show for many months now, I think that these district attorneys, these women and men across the state, it's left up to the people to vote them in or vote them out. They are the oversight. They are the people who determine whether or not these district attorneys are doing their jobs. And so I've said since day one, I thought that this bill was a little stretch. We already have mechanisms in place at the state that actually make sure that if district attorneys are doing the wrong thing, they can be removed. They can actually be penalized. But the governor made it clear that he was going to sign this, and I think that it's going to be very interesting to see now how district attorneys will conduct themselves.
Janelle, is this giving too much power to the commission?
I am researching this a little bit more. When I think about all of this, my biggest concern is that I don't want to continue to strengthen the government, right? I want to make sure that we continue to keep the power in the hands of the people. Whereas I don't think that this role should be an elected role. I think it should be a role where you're hired. That way you don't have to consider campaigning and re-election and all that stuff while you're doing your job. I think it should be something where you obviously have the competition of hiring. But I'm actually still researching this and trying to understand it because I just don't want the government to become too big and too powerful.
Also this week, Governor Kemp signed the bill that would allow low-income pregnant women to qualify for welfare before their baby is born. And Melita, critics say that this will really only help a few hundred women statewide.
When you look at the figures, that is probably very true. And so it's a great bragging point for the governor, but it in reality impacts only a few hundred households.
Phil.
You can't win with the Democrats. You try to do something good and you get attacked for it. I'll just give a shout out to new freshman Representative Sue Hong. She was the one that shepherded this legislation, and it's a good step.
A good step in the right direction, Theron?
Well, the one thing you got to really talk about is the DFACS department has sort of done a satisfactory job of actually making the number less of people who actually are on welfare in Georgia. And so, but I agree with Melita. I think this bill does only affect a few hundred, but hey, at a time where women need all the things that they can when they're pregnant, we have a lot of rural counties who probably are going to benefit in Metro County. I mean, we all like to think, since we're in Atlanta, that we're better than the rest of the state, and this is a statewide show, and so we have to think about those people as well.
And this also gets at that issue of the maternal mortality rate.
That's exactly where I was going, actually. That's a conversation that a lot of Democrat women talk about, is the maternal mortality rate, and I think this is going to assist with that by having some access to health care. But I do want us to examine the qualifications for entitlements, because I do think that some of the qualifications do lead and kind of promote single parent households, and we're at 67% in the Black community, and I think we need to reduce that highly. And then it also kind of promotes this government mandate stuff by forcing kids to have to be immunized. I think that's also something that we need to look at too, is changing the qualifications.
I just want to give a stat though. In 2006, Lori, 33,302 families were on welfare. In 2022, that number has gone down to 6,190. And so that's why I think that there's a movement in this state. But I agree, the maternal mortality issue is real, and we're the worst state when it comes to the issue.
We'll leave it there. Up next, some state lawmakers are calling on the U.S. Justice Department to investigate the shooting death of a protester of the Atlanta Police Training Facility.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
Several Democratic lawmakers are calling for the U.S. Justice Department to launch an independent investigation into the shooting death of Manuel Terran, who was protesting the Atlanta police training facility. Phil, there have been several conflicting reports on what really happened. Should the Justice Department get involved?
No, and here's why. Let's look at the facts versus the myths. It's true that there was no gunpowder residue found on the hands of the dead radical there, but that often is the case. Here's what the mainstream media rarely reports. The 9mm bullet that was taken out of the trooper that was shot, it matched the 9mm gun. It also, the gun was bought by the dead radical. I mean, that's pretty clear cut right there. And of course, you've got witnesses where the gunfire was, where all of the law enforcement converged on the tent where this person was firing at the law enforcement.
And so, he has a name. We don't have to label him a dead radical. He has a name.
Well, I mean, he was there illegally and he had a firearm. He's trying to kill law enforcement officers.
Theron.
Well, you know, last week we had a very good discussion about what happened, and I still stand by with the reports that we've read. It's just too many unanswered questions. And so that's why I think that the Department of Justice should investigate this, because you know, we're sitting here debating residue on the hand, chemical testing, you know, what's the reason for a person to be shot 57 times. And by the way, he was a non-binary, so we want to make sure that we don't disrespect him by calling him a radical.
Well, but, he was a radical. I mean, we just want to kill people.
Let's stay on the issue.
But I think that also going forward, we all want to make sure that while this issue is not over, there are probably going to be more protesters, and we want to get them to a safe place. We don't want officers to be put in harm's way. So I think the Department of Justice investigation is needed, and I think Democrats are doing the right thing on this issue.
I got to move on. This week, Governor Brian Kemp signed the so-called digital download tax into law. Now, when Georgians download books, video games, and music, they'll now be charged a tax that could bring in more than $200 million by 2028. Melita.
Well, it's a great new way to bring in revenue, and it could be, like you said, $200 million annually. So it's a good thing, and I don't think there's much controversy about it.
Janelle, a new tax by Republicans.
I know. I don't like increasing taxes. I don't care who does it. I don't like it. And I feel like am I not paying taxes when I pay for my subscription? I mean, I don't know. But however, I do think that I want us to look at the fair tax. You know, I am a consumption-based tax person. I am. I want the fair tax, and I want to get rid of the income tax. I think there are ways to cut back while still making sure we have fun. There was a time when the country was formed where every citizen just had to pay a certain amount based on your census, and that covered your state. And I do think that we can get back to that at some point, but I am not here for
Republicans read this bill? I don't know why we're
Yeah, Phil,
a lot of support. Yeah, a lot of support.
You have support from Democrats on raising taxes.
Pretty good. Yeah.
Theron?
When I read it, I mean, look, a lot of things are already kind of being taxed. I mean, this obviously was something that I think that Democrats and Republicans agreed on. And you know, when I think about the downloads, and I think it's what, 4%. I mean, it could be a lot, but I'll reserve time for bigger issues where I can fight the Republicans on.
All right, We'll leave it there. Coming up, winners and losers. Stay tuned.
I know it's like the Democrat. Like it's like we were flipped.
That was a nice scramble.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
All right, Theron, we'll start with you this week.
Again, I just think we got to thank everyone who was involved, multi-jurisdictional approach, but definitely the Cobb County officers who went and apprehended this murderer safely. Also want to give a big shout out to the new Jonesboro mayor, Danya Sator. She's the first African-American woman who was elected in Jonesboro. Also want to give a shout out to the city of Macon. They were named given the award for the best tasting drinking water in Georgia. And so I know we got a lot of viewers down in Macon. And then lastly, I want to make Marjorie Taylor Greene my loser, who believes that in a country where guns are outnumbering people, more guns are the solution to gun violence.
Janelle.
Well, kudos to Macon. That's where Kelvin was born. My grandmother lives there.
It's where my husband was born.
I love it. I'm glad she's drinking good water. And thank you to everyone who came to Bourbon and Blazers last week. It was our first inaugural fundraiser for Let's Win for America Action. Also, shout out to Ro Bourne, who is a fan of the show. Her friend Takosha Swan told me to make sure I shouted you out, so thank her. And then lastly, the Department of Corrections is hiring, and I just want to make sure I put that out there. I do sit on the board. They are hiring, so go to gdcjobs.com if you are able to apply.
Melita.
Well, this weekend begins the college graduation season all over the state, and so congratulations and best wishes to all the young people who are graduating and the families who've supported their dreams. And then I grew up 23 miles from Moultrie, Georgia, which on Thursday had a triple murder-suicide. 3 women, a mother, a grandmother, and the manager of a local fast food store were killed by a young man before he turned the gun on himself. So it's another evidence of gun violence, and my condolences go out to all the people near where I grew up.
Phil.
You know, the Rivian electric vehicle plant over in that 4-county area east of Atlanta, they had a court win, Georgia Court of Appeals, and it upheld basically the model that Governor Kemp and Economic Development Commissioner Pat Wilson has been using. And my loser is this drag queen on active duty for the Navy, who is now the recruiting poster. I mean, what is all this? This really, our enemies have got to be laughing at us.
Real quick, I got to make sure I stay good in my household. Shout out to my wife, who's on the board of the Lifeline Project. It was a Good Human Gala. They raised over $300,000.
Wow.
This is to protect
Great.
cats and dogs. And Chairman Rob Pitts got a big award for opening up the Fulton County Health Animal Shelter. So shout out to my wife, who did a fantastic job as a board member.
Great, and I just want to shout out to Drew Ellenberg, a friend of yours, Phil, who I met this past week. He's a big fan of the show, watches it every week. So everybody else have a great week. We'll see you next week.